If there was ever a competition for the unluckiest man in history, Tsutomu Yamaguchi might just win it. On August 6, 1945, 29-year-old Tsutomu Yamaguchi was nearing the end of a months-long business assignment in Hiroshima. After spending several months away from home, he was finally preparing to return to his wife and young son, and this was supposed to be his last day in the city. The war surrounded everything, but for Tsutomu, it had become part of the background of daily life, something present, but not yet personal. At around 8 a.m., he was moving through the city to complete one final task before leaving Hiroshima when he realized he had forgotten an important document and turned back to retrieve it. It seemed like a minor inconvenience at the time, but it would change everything. As he walked, he noticed a lone aircraft high above the city. Air raid warnings had become so common by this stage of the war that few people paid much attention to them. Then, at 8:15 a.m., the sky erupted in a blinding flash. Before Tsutomu could even process what he was seeing, an enormous explosion tore through Hiroshima. The force of the blast threw him to the ground as a wave of heat and destruction swept across the city. For a few moments, everything was confusion, silence, then chaos. When he finally managed to get back to his feet, the city around him was almost unrecognizable. Buildings had collapsed, fires were spreading rapidly, thick smoke rose into the sky, and thousands of survivors were trying to understand what had just happened. Tsutomu had just survived one of the deadliest attacks in human history. But what he didn't know was that his nightmare was far from over. In fact, the most extraordinary part of his story had not even begun. Injured and disoriented, he began searching for a way out of the city. Every direction revealed more destruction. Yet somehow, he was still alive. As fires continued to spread across Hiroshima, he eventually managed to reconnect with two co-workers who had also survived the blast. Together, they found shelter and waited through the night, uncertain of what the next day would bring. When morning came, Tsutomu made a decision. He was going home. Despite his injuries, despite everything he had witnessed, he was determined to return to his family. So he made his way to a railway station. Remarkably, some train services were still operating. And with much of Hiroshima in ruins behind him, Tsutomu boarded a train and began the journey toward Nagasaki. At that moment, he believed he was leaving the worst experience of his life behind. He could not have been more wrong. After arriving in Nagasaki, Tsutomu was finally reunited with his wife and young son. Though injured and exhausted, he had survived, and for a brief moment it seemed as though the ordeal was finally over. But Japan was still at war, and life, as much as possible, continued. So on the morning of August 9th, just 3 days after Hiroshima, Tsutomu reported to work. Still recovering from his injuries, he began explaining to his co-workers what he had experienced in Hiroshima. Many found his account difficult to believe. The idea that a single bomb could destroy an entire city sounded almost impossible. As Tsutomu tried to explain what he had seen, history was preparing to repeat itself. Shortly after 11 a.m., another American bomber appeared over Nagasaki. Air raid warnings had become so common by this stage of the war that few people paid much attention to them. Then, the sky flashed. For an instant, Tsutomu recognized exactly what he was seeing. Moments later, a massive explosion tore through the city. Just 3 days after surviving Hiroshima, Tsutomu Yamaguchi found himself in Nagasaki as a second atomic bomb detonated overhead. The chances of surviving one atomic bombing were already incredibly small. Surviving one, and then being present for another, seemed almost impossible. Yet somehow, it had happened. In Hiroshima alone, around 140,000 people were killed by the end of 1945. In Nagasaki, another 70,000 lives were lost. Entire cities were effectively erased in moments by weapons the world had never seen before. For many years, he rarely spoke about what had happened. Like many survivors, he carried the memory quietly. focusing instead on rebuilding his life in the aftermath of the war. It was only decades later that his story became widely known, eventually leading to official recognition by the Japanese government. He would go on to live a long life, passing away in 2010 at the age of 93. But what made his story truly remarkable was not just that he survived two of the most destructive events in human history. It was that he had started that week as an ordinary man, simply trying to finish a business trip and go home. If you enjoyed this story, consider liking and subscribing for more videos like this.